Hi, welcome to Dream and Do. When an empath takes on the narcissist's darkness and somehow survives, something extraordinary happens. Carl Jung observed that they don't just heal, they transform into something the narcissist never anticipated. The person who once absorbed every projection becomes untouchable. The soul that carried the weight of everyone else's shadows develops a kind of immunity, an inner shield against manipulation. And the surprising thing, their presence itself becomes mirror. Like compelling others to look at the darkness that they've been projecting all these years. Picture this. You've carried their rage, their shame, their emptiness, until you could barely recognize yourself. You became the emotional landfill for their unprocessed pain, while they walked away untouched, leaving you drowning in the wreckage of their inner world. But then, something shifts, not with an explosion of anger, not with drama, but with a quiet, almost terrifying clarity. You no longer defend yourself to individuals who never bothered to hear. You no longer soak up tears that never were yours. And worst of all, you unplug for their constant emotional emergencies. Jung called this process the process of individuation. I term it the emergence of psychological sovereignty. This individual who has emerged on the other side is not the person who went into the trap laid by the narcissist. This person is an entirely different archetype. So powerful, they redefine all the relationships in the world, but the reality that not many people comprehend. This change isn't born out of therapy sessions, self-help literature, or speeches. It results from the night sea journey described by Jung, a plunge to the psychological depths of hell so extreme that it leaves you with nothing but the rawest part of you. The empath who manages to survive this ride ends up as the shadow walker. This is an individual who has gazed into the pit of human shadow and emerged, not fractured, but irrevocably transformed. Jung once wrote, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." And that's exactly what the empath-narcissist relationship is. A living inferno, a psychological crucible that either shatters you completely or transforms you into something indestructible. This isn't just recovery, this is evolution. It's a consciousness upgrade Jung believed was essential for humanity's survival. And here's the ultimate twist. In their desperate attempt to consume your soul, the narcissist unknowingly becomes the catalyst for your greatest transformation. They believe they're destroying you, but in reality, they're forging you into something unbreakable. Jung spent decades researching what he termed psychological types, and he found something disturbing in highly sensitive persons. They tend to become shadow containers, unselfishly taking in the psychic garbage others will not deal with. Even Jung wrote, "The healthy man does not torture others generally. It is the tortured who become torturers." But empaths break this cycle. They represent a rare third path, the ones who absorb the torment without becoming tormentors themselves. This creates what Jung termed participation mystique, an unconscious merging, where the empath can no longer tell the difference between their own emotions and the shadows projected onto them. And the narcissist, they use this ruthlessly, making the empath's sensitivity their own dumping ground. But here's where Jung's insight becomes revolutionary. He discovered that even this painful exploitation has a hidden purpose. He wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, only outgrown." The empath-narcissist dynamic forces exactly that kind of outgrowing. It's evolution by fire consciousness forged in crisis. The narcissist represents the denied shadow, all the darkness they refuse to acknowledge. The empath becomes the unwilling vessel for it. But in carrying that darkness, something profound happens. The empath begins to understand the shadow, developing insights that fundamentally reshape their entire perception of reality. Jung believed consciousness evolves through conflict, and this dynamic is perhaps the most brutal accelerator of consciousness psychology has ever documented. The empath doesn't merely bear witness to darkness, but has to bear it with them until they've developed shadow literacy, reading and deciphering psychological darkness as their primary language. So if you've ever felt like you were holding someone else's emotional baggage, type in the comments, "I was their shadow container." Jung referred to the dark night of the soul, but for empaths involved with narcissists, it becomes something even darker, what I term the shadow immersion experience. You don't observe darkness in the relationship with a narcissist, you have to exist within it. Their projections aren't painful. They redefine the narrative inside you. Their shame transforms into your self-doubt. Their fury becomes the foundation for your anxiety. Their nothingness permeates the depression. You slowly metabolize the psychological poisons until your very self disintegrates. Jung referred to this psychological poisoning, and he issued the warning that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. But for empaths, the pain isn't individual, it is generational. You are working through shadows that reach back through generations of unprocessed trauma. The narcissist sucks you into what Jung referred to as the nigredo, psychological alchemy's blackening process. That is where everything previously stable breaks down into complete chaos. Jung said, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order." To get to the secret order, however, you've got to get through the disorder. Here is the key finding that Jung came up with. The psyche possesses an immunity system. If the foreign psychological information is imposed on your mind, your true self comes up with shadow antibodies. And shadow antibodies are defense mechanisms that will pick up on manipulation on the cellular level. That is how the empathic shift transcends intellectual awareness. You not only understand manipulation, but sense it on the nervous system level. You begin rejecting poison on the body level itself, as though it is a visceral allergy, Jung stated. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. And that is just what occurs. Surviving an emotionally abusive narcissist has exposed the empath to raw darkness they will likely never see again. From this fight comes the wounded healer, according to the concepts of Jung, but not the romantic sense. This is not the person's wound. They've been wounded through the unconscious shadow of another, and the healing comes through bringing the shadow conscious. Jung observed, the most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm not easily disturbed. That is the gift hidden in this torment, an unshakable peace born from walking through hell and surviving. But before this transformation comes the collapse, what Jung studied as ego death. It's the moment your false self completely shatters. For empaths, this collapse is especially brutal because their entire identity is built around being helpful, compassionate, and endlessly available. And the breaking point. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, chilling. One morning you wake up, look in the mirror, and realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. Your empathy feels dead. Your hope feels poisoned. Your trust feels broken beyond repair. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But for the empath at rock bottom, there doesn't even seem to be a self left to accept. Years of absorbing other people's shadows have buried the authentic self alive. Here comes the nigredo all over again, blackening, complete dissolution of the whole that was stable. We are reminded by Jung, we cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. But how can you accept this kind of death when you no longer know who the accepting self is? You've been so identified with others' interior lives that you've separated yourself from yours. And yet, Jung taught us something that totally alters the dynamic. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. But the paradox is this. The option becomes viable only after the false self has been totally eradicated. This people, pleasing, rescuing, conflict, avoiding personality has to die, so the true self might emerge. And the narcissist, in twisted fashion, is the slayer or destroyer of the false self through his or her ceaseless attacks. That is why I refer to narcissists as unwitting shamans. Unbeknownst to themselves, they administer a psychological dismemberment that induces individuation, something therapy over the course of decades may not reach. Jung wrote, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong." And this is exactly what happens. The narcissist pushes you so far into psychological nonsense that you're forced to create your own sense. And in that abyss, something ancient begins to awaken. Jung called it the self, the archetype of wholeness that exists beneath all conditioning. The empath discovers something life-altering. They are not their trauma. They are not the emotions they've absorbed. They are not the compulsive giving that once defined them. They are something infinitely more powerful. Jung wrote, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. To many, the words are abstract, at best. A nice poster phrase. To the victim of narcissistic abuse who is an empath, it is lived experience. They have been stripped down to the very last faux self, so the true self is all that remains. This is why Jung was so fascinated by alchemy. He saw it as a mirror of psychological transformation. The empath's journey follows what he called the opus contra naturam, the work against nature that creates something entirely new. Out of this crucible emerges not the same empath who entered the relationship, but what I call the integrated empath. The integrated empath retains their sensitiveness, but with impenetrable boundaries to protect it. This was written about by Jung in the idea of the transcendent function, of how the mind could create something new out of the coming together of the opposites. The survivor unites shadow with light, victim with victor, wound with wisdom. Jung once said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But that is where the difference lies. The narcissist remains unconscious. The empath becomes hyperconscious. It creates psychological sovereignty, as defined by Jung, or shadow immunity, as I term it. You develop the equivalent of night vision when you've been locked up in complete darkness. The manipulation that previously harmed you now runs off you, like water on glass, not through hardening, but through waking up. Jung taught us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Transformed empath has brought manipulation out into the light, thereby disempowering it. You see the manipulation long before the puppet show starts, but where the change becomes truly revolutionary is here. The integrated empath not only refuses manipulation, being with them dismantles it. This is the constellation effect, according to Jung, whereby the individual's degree of awareness will change the whole field. As far as we can discern, he said, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. That is what the transformed empath becomes. A fierce, unyielding light. Not the navet glow that gets devoured, but a fire that exposes shadows wherever it burns. If you've reached the stage where attempts at manipulation feel almost laughable, comment below, I see through the matrix now. Jung took decades to chart archetypes, these archetypes of human experience, and he found one archetype that arises only by virtue of tremendous psychological stress. I term it the shadow walker. The shadow walker has journeyed into psychological hell and returned with forbidden knowledge. They embody the wounded healer, but with a crucial difference. Traditional wounded healers guide others through their wounds. Shadow walkers heal others through their wholeness. Jung once said, everyone you meet knows something you don't know, but need to know. Learn from them. The shadow walker embodies the knowledge most people run from, how to navigate the darkest corners of the human psyche without being consumed by them. They become living proof that psychological sovereignty is possible, and that alone is threatening. Their very existence disrupts the unconscious contracts that keep people chained to dysfunction. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. That is why your emergence after transformation is so upsetting. You no longer play the game. You've moved out of the matrix of manipulation and projection. Jung wrote, the individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. The shadow walker has not only had to struggle, there are no contests. They've developed what I call tribal immunity. The greatest victory of the transformed empath is this: the ability to maintain individual consciousness even when surrounded by the unconscious pull of the group. But this victory comes with a cost. Jung called it the loneliness of individuation. The price of awakening is separation from the masses who still sleep. Jung explained, loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. And yet, this loneliness isn't empty. It's full of authentic self-connection that most people will never taste. You discover that being alone with your true self is infinitely richer than being surrounded by those who only see their projections on you. Jung once remarked, to be normal is the ultimate aim of the unsuccessful. And the shadow walker has transcended normal. They've exchanged it for something infinitely greater, the ability to be real. Highly individuated people, Jung found become what I call consciousness mirrors. Their very presence forces others to see themselves clearly, often for the first time. The transformed empath becomes such a mirror, but unlike before, when they reflected back only what others wanted to see, they now reflect back the truth. This creates what Jung described as projection withdrawal. People can no longer unload their shadow onto you. Instead, they are forced to face it themselves. And that is deeply uncomfortable. It's why your transformation often triggers extreme reactions. Some will resent you. They'll call you cold, changed, or even crazy. Jung captured this perfectly. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people prefer irritation to understanding. Others, however, will be drawn to you like moths to a flame. They can sense the difference in your presence. Magnetic, dangerous, numinous. Jung called this the numinous effect, when archetypal energy shines through a human being. If you've noticed people treating you differently since your transformation, comment below. My energy shifted, and everyone felt it. But perhaps the most profound effect is on other empaths still trapped in toxic dynamics. Your existence becomes living proof. Escape is possible, transformation is real, and no one has to remain a prisoner forever. Jung identified a paradox in true power. It doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself so completely that no one else can control you. The transformed empath embodies this paradox. They radiate power precisely because they no longer need it over others. Jung called this the treasure hard to attain, complete self-possession. And he reminded us, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. The transformed empath doesn't announce boundaries. They embody them. They don't make ultimatums. They live their limits. This embodiment creates what I call paradoxical magnetism. The more self-contained you become, the more others are drawn to you. The less you need approval, the more people crave yours. The less available you are for emotional dumping, the more respect you command. Jung observed, where love reigns, there is no will to power. And where the will to power is paramount, love is lacking. The transformed empath has transcended power games through love, but love of self first, not narcissistic love, but what Jung called appropriate self-regard, the foundation of every healthy relationship. From this foundation comes something rare, unshakable self-worth, and through radical self-acceptance, acceptance forged in fire, the empath gains access to deeper connection than ever before by saying no to manipulation. They create room for authentic love. Jung wrote, even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. The transformed empath embodies this balance. They can hold space for another's darkness without absorbing it, support others without losing themselves, love deeply without self-erasure. This is what Jung meant by conscious containment. You no longer act as an unconscious sponge for other people's waste. You hold boundaries so firm they serve as a model for others. Jung described this as the guardian function. The transformed empath often becomes a guardian, not through aggression, but through the simple power of example, he wrote. To ask the right question is already half the solution of a problem. Your boundaries themselves become the question that forces others to confront their own patterns. You become a boundary beacon, proof that psychological sovereignty is possible. Through what Jung called morphic resonance, your consciousness doesn't just transform you, it raises those around you. You don't need to preach, you don't need to teach. Your existence does the work. Jung put it this way, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. The difference now is that your reactions are conscious. You choose which energies to engage. You no longer react compulsively. And that choice is freedom. Of course, there's a danger here. What Jung called the integration trap. Some survivors mistake hardness for strength and isolation for safety. They swing from total porosity to total closure. But true integration means balance. It means empathy and boundaries, openness and discernment, compassion and standards. Jung reminded us, emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering as soon as we form a clear and precise picture of it. The integrated empath feels everything. but is consumed by nothing. They can witness pain without absorbing it, offer love without losing themselves. This balance requires constant vigilance. Old patterns will try to resurface, especially in moments of stress. But once you've tasted psychological freedom, you can never fully return to unconscious servitude. The psyche has been rewired too deeply. Jung believed that individual transformation inevitably ripples into collective transformation. The individual is the only reality, he wrote. Your healing creates consciousness ripples. Others feel your energy and begin to question their own patterns. Without saying a word, you become living proof that abuse does not have the final word. Some people will resist, trying to drag you back through guilt, manipulation, or emotional emergencies. Jung called this the crab bucket effect, the unconscious drive to pull others down when they climb out. But your transformation has made you immune. You see their tactics not as truth, but as projections. If this journey resonates with you, comment, "My healing became my superpower." Because the empath who absorbs the narcissist's darkness and survives doesn't just heal, they evolve. They become proof that the human psyche is stronger than we ever imagined, proof that light can emerge from the deepest shadows, proof that authentic power is born not from domination, but from total self-mastery. The narcissist thought they were consuming your light. Instead, they forged it into something unbreakable. They thought they were destroying your empathy. Instead, they refined it into conscious compassion that cannot be exploited. Your transformation is a beacon, a living map for others still trapped in the psychological prison, proof that freedom isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Once you understand the rules of the game, Jung wrote, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Your descent into darkness forced you to look inside so deeply that you discovered the indestructible core of who you really are. That core was always there. The narcissist simply burned away everything that wasn't authentically you. And if you want to explore how to recognize whether you're living from your authentic self or still trapped in absorbed projections, check out my video on 8 signs you're not meant for this world, where I dive deeper into Jung's insights on those who perceive reality differently from the unconscious masses. Your sensitivity was never weakness. It was your superpower, waiting to be activated through conscious integration. Thanks for walking this path of transformation with me. If you found this valuable, subscribe for more.